My dad died nearly 2 years ago, and we just buried him today. He was a writer, though you've probably never heard of him. He was known in small circles, celebrated by the community where he lived, but his books will likely never grace the shelves of Barnes and Nobles. I say that like it's a fact, but that may not be the case anymore. Dad, much like one of those painters from the 1800s, became infinitely more famous in his death than he ever was in life. People who wouldn't return his calls, wouldn't even think of publishing his work, now come to see him from miles away. This probably seems strange, given that I just told you that he's dead, so let me start at the beginning. Dad died as he lived, at his keyboard. He's been writing the same book for as long as I can remember. It's a massive 7 or 8 volume series. In one of my earliest memories, I can remember toddling into his office and looking up at him as he smiled down at me, his fingers never leaving the keyboard as he plinked away. Dad wrote other things for magazines or freelance work, but the books were his magnum opus. He would tell anyone who would listen, usually interested friends of mine who were aspiring writers themselves, how the book would be the greatest work once it was done. He had envisioned 10 books in all, detailing the hero's journey of his main character as he attempted to find his father's murderer across several continents, meeting people and finding clues along the way. I've heard him talk about that book almost every day since I was old enough to understand what he was talking about, but I couldn't tell you much about them. He never let anybody read them. He was so protective of them. I don't know more than a dozen people who were aware of its existence at all. That being said, he was always in his study when he had time, tapping away at the keys and refining his manuscript for the day that it would be picked up by an editor. I was the one who found him, and it will haunt me for the rest of my life. I was getting ready for college, packing up my things, moving out, and I came to see if he would help me move some furniture onto the truck. He'd been in his office all day, and I kind of thought maybe he was mad at me. I know he didn't want me to leave. He was sad to see me go, but he had to understand that I had to go to college. I had a full-ride scholarship. I'd be a fool not to use it, and living on campus would give me access to resources I wouldn't have at home. It seemed like the best choice to move out, and I couldn't believe he couldn't see that. So when I stuck my head in and asked him, I was surprised when he didn't turn around. That only seemed to cement in my head the idea that he was mad at me. He had his back to the door, as he always did, fingers tapping away, and when he didn't say anything, I just stood there and looked at the back of his head for a moment. He had a bald spot forming, the hair receding away from the center, and I thought it was a little sad to watch my dad aging in such an obvious way. I asked him again, his fingers never slowing, but when he didn't say anything, I just went downstairs and managed to manhandle the desk into the U-Haul by myself. I decided I wouldn't bother him if he wanted to act like this. He would fold when it came time for me to leave, apologizing for acting like this, and we would have a hug before I drove off into the sunset. Around lunchtime, I looked at my now empty room and realized I was finished packing. Mom was at work at the post office, and I had planned to swing in and say bye on my way out of town. We had said our goodbyes that morning, with a lot of tears and hugging over breakfast, and Dad was the only one I still needed to say goodbye to. So I went upstairs again, saying I needed to leave and wondering if he'd give me a hug. His fingers just kept tapping away uninterrupted. "Come on, Dad," I said, stepping inside as he continued to ignore me. "I know you're bummed about this, but it's time for me to get out of here and make my own way. It's not like I'll never see you again. I'll be here for Thanksgiving. That's less than..." But when I put my hand on his shoulder, I noticed how cold it was. Dad had been up here for 3 days writing, and Mom said she didn't think he'd come to bed in all that time. That wasn't uncommon for Dad. He would hyperfixate on a project, or revisions for days at a time. His office was towards the back of the house on the 2nd floor, so without foot traffic or noise, he could lose himself for days as he worked. He usually came down for food after everyone was asleep, but I couldn't remember hearing him stumble around lately. I turned him towards me, his hands moving comically in front of him as he swung away from the desk, and as he came away, he began to scream as if someone was stabbing him. I stumbled away, taking in his long face and sunken eyes, and found myself running from the room as I grabbed the phone out of my pocket. Mom said she'd be home immediately, and as I waited downstairs, I could still hear him screaming in his office. She came home in a rush, going up the stairs 2 at a time, and when the screaming finally stopped, I breathed a sigh of relief. When she came downstairs, she asked me to come to his office. I need to talk to you about something, and I think this should be a family decision. I came back to see that Dad was still staring at the screen of his MacBook, tapping away like we weren't even there. I don't know how to explain this, but your father's dead. Looking at his fingers as they went about their tireless typing, I asked if she was kidding. Dad was clearly alive. His hands were moving, and I could see words on the screen forming coherent sentences. Were they playing a joke or something? None of what she was saying made any sense. I checked his pulse. He has no pulse, no vitals. He's gone, sweetie. But it appears that he's not quite gone. She tried to move him, and as she turned him away from the computer, I could see his lifeless face as it turned to regard me. His jaw had been hanging slack, his eyes open and staring, and as his hands came away from the keyboard, he started screaming all over again. It was deep and tortured, similar to the one he'd made before, and without even meaning to, I turned him back to the keyboard where his hands started typing again. I asked her what was going on, and Mom shrugged as she tried to come up with a reason for this. His book was important to him. You know that. I think maybe once he finishes it, he might stop on his own. I can't explain what's happening here, but I don't want him to die with his work unfinished. Your father kept saying it wasn't ready, but I'm going to send the first manuscript to his editor. Maybe once he sees it and someone puts it into print, he'll finally be able to rest. Either way, let's keep this between us, okay? I want your father to pass on without regrets, don't you? I nodded, telling her of course I did. I wanted Dad to die in peace. Then do him this last favor, and don't tell anyone what you've seen here. Promise? I really didn't know how to feel about this, but I told her I wouldn't tell anyone, and she thanked me as she hugged me goodbye. I left in my U-Haul, unsure how to feel about the situation, but I kept the secret. I didn't come home for the next year. I came home for Thanksgiving, as promised, but the whole thing felt uncomfortable. Mom and I sat downstairs eating, her curious about how school was going, and me filling her in on my studies. As I ate turkey and tried to have a normal conversation over stuffing, all I could focus on was the tap-tap-tapping from upstairs. Mom had closed the door to Dad's office, something that I could never remember happening at any time in my life. But despite her best efforts, the tapping was still audible. There was a smell from the room at the end of the hall, and I was worried about her living in a house with a decomposing body. She said he hadn't decomposed much, but I think she might have been trying to spare my feelings. Worse than the smell, though, was the tapping. It never stopped. It sounded too loud to be from whole fingers. Despite this, Mom was in pretty good spirits. She said that Dad's first book was being edited, and his publicist thought it was likely to be ready for shelves by next year. He couldn't believe my dad had been keeping this gem to himself for so long, and I think that's when I really realized how few people Dad had shared his book with. She said the initial payment on the book had allowed her to pay some overdue bills, and she would send him the second book sometime next year. If I release them slowly, it won't seem so odd when he finishes, and I let them know that he's passed. I asked if his writing had slowed at all, and she said that he was typing all day and night. He never rests, and I've had to start sleeping in my noise-canceling headphones. The sound takes some getting used to, but I think I can put it out of my mind. I had meant to stay the week, but I ended up making excuses and leaving the day after Thanksgiving. The sound of the keys as they clicked away was becoming too much for me to handle. After that, I made excuses not to come home. I told Mom I had a paper due during Christmas and stayed on campus over the holiday. I took extra classes so I didn't have to come home on the semesters that I'd be able to take a break from. I still called her on the phone, but our conversations became shorter and shorter as time went on. The longer I was on the line with her, the more pervasive the clicking became, and it felt like I could hear it over the phone no matter where she was. Mom's mental state began to deteriorate as well. She'd sent the second book to his publicist, and he'd fast-tracked it after the first one had done so well. She deflected any sort of interviews or phone calls for Dad, telling them how shy and anxious he was. But people really seemed to want to pick his brain about the direction of the books, and they were becoming harder and harder to put off. She didn't sound like her usual self either. It was clear that she wasn't sleeping. She said the clicking was getting louder and louder the longer it went on. I tried to do some soundproofing on the office, but it never seems to help. I can't stand to be in there for very long. Even though he's looking at the screen, I can feel him watching me when I'm in there. I think I can hear something moving around at night, too. Mom took a deep breath, and I could almost see her looking in the direction of the office as she pitched her voice lower. I asked what she meant, afraid that maybe animals had gotten in to try to get at Dad's body, but she said it was just little sounds. You remember how he used to leave his office late at night to get food? Sometimes I feel like I can hear someone coming down the stairs in the wee hours of the morning. While I was listening to it the other night, I realized that I couldn't hear the keyboard anymore, and that scared me even more. She started crying then, and I think I had already decided to come home that weekend so we could sort this out. I hadn't come home in a long time, and I found a very different woman than the one I had found over Thanksgiving a year before. And why not? It had to be nerve-wracking, knowing you were sharing a house with a corpse. Mom looked like she had aged 20 years. Her hair, light blonde the last time I'd seen it, was threaded with gray and looked thinner than ever. Her skin sagged, and her eyes looked bruised from the bags under them. She was so thin to the point of emaciation, and I wondered if she had been eating. When she hugged me, I could feel her ribs pressing against me, and I decided then that something had to be done before I lost both my parents. I told her that we had to end this. I told her that we had to put him to rest, but she feebly resisted. He isn't done yet. He's still typing up there. I can't lay him to rest until he's finished. I asked her how long that would be, but she didn't seem to have an answer. I told her I was tired and wanted to rest, but after I heard her door close and the sound of her springs grumbling as she went to bed, I got up and went downstairs. I wanted to see what this thing was that was moving around after dark, and I knew just the place to hide. There was a small closet in the living room, a place for wrapping paper and old crafts Mom hadn't gotten around to yet. And after sliding some things around, I made myself comfortable and cracked the door. It took some time. I wished I had some coffee to keep me from dozing in the small, warm place. I was just starting to nod off, my phone showing 3:30 in the morning, when the landing at the top of the stairs creaked. Something glided down almost soundlessly, its body light as I pressed my eye to the slit in the door to see what it was. It was dark in the living room, the curtains drawn, but I didn't dare turn on my light. If it knew I was here, it might flee, and then I'd have nothing to report to Mom in the morning. Luckily for me, it jostled right past the closet door, and the creature was impossible to miss. It was thin, almost lacking dimensions, creaking as it ambled into the kitchen. I held my breath as it disappeared into the dim space, but the pale head was hard to miss. When it turned to look at the closet from the kitchen doorway, I feared I'd made a noise. When those empty eye sockets fixed on the door, I covered my mouth with my hands. When the creature creaked its way into the kitchen and disappeared from sight, I tripped out of the closet and made my way less than gracefully back up the stairs and into my old room. If it heard me, it didn't stop at the door to comment. Only then did I come to the same conclusion that my mother had, realizing what was missing from the silent house. The tapping had stopped. We called the police the next day, me threatening to call them myself if Mom didn't. I didn't know what that thing was I'd seen the night before in the kitchen, but I couldn't very well leave her alone with it. She just nodded and picked up the phone. I think she was ready to call them, honestly. She lived with Dad's corpse for 2 years, and even she had to agree it was time to end it. The paramedics weren't sure what to make of him, but he was definitely what I had seen the night before when it came into the kitchen. He had almost completely rotted, but his bones had moldering flesh still attached in places. His scalp had some hair clinging to it. The bald spot I had noticed was still visible, but we had taken his hands off the keyboard before they got there. When we had taken him from the computer, his scream was little more than a wheeze of protest. He had no vocal cords to scream with, but still, he protested. The police had questions, but I think Mom managed to convince them that it was all harmless. She said that when he died, she had just gone a little bit crazy. She couldn't cope with him being gone, so she just pretended he was in his office, typing away on his novel. I told them that that was what she had told me for months, and I think they believed me. Dad's remains were taken to the funeral home, and it goes without saying that his funeral was a closed casket affair. As we sat on the front row, though, I heard something that would haunt me until I went into the ground myself. Dad may not have been able to scream, but it seemed his work went on regardless. As I sat there with Mom, my mother sobbing as she heard the all-too-familiar sound, we both heard the low tapping of those bony fingers smacking against the lid of the coffin. I can only assume that they still press against the lid even now, my father's last story worn into the wood of his coffin. I grew up outside of Copenhagen. Most of my life spent on my father's sheep farm. It's beautiful country if you've never been, and I can think of no better place to spend my childhood. The rolling hills and forests are perfect for playing knights or policemen or whatever a child may want. The trees became my castles, the underbridges my banks or shops to chase robbers from, and I spent the hours outside of my chores letting my imagination run wild. That imagination was probably why no one believed me when I told them about the ravens. I'd been telling tales since I was very young. I claimed I'd seen fairies dancing around a mushroom ring. I'd seen a parade of lights that had turned out to be the procession of Queen Mab, that I had seen dinosaurs in the forest, and black dogs, and kelpies, and all sorts of things. I loved stories, so I wanted to see something magical. The world was often such a dour place that I prayed for a little magic in my life, and created it until I could find my wish fulfilled. I was 9 when I found some of that magic, but I wasn't quite as ready as I believed I was. My grandparents lived less than a mile from our farm. Their property was at the back end of ours, truth be told, and when my gran called and said she had just baked a bunch of cookies and was hoping I could come help her eat some of the extras, I turned hopefully to my mum and asked if I could go over for some cookies. Mum asked if my chores were done, and I said they were. It was summer. I wouldn't have to go fill the sheep feeders till after dinner. I'd been diligent through the day, and now my midday was mine to do what I liked. "You may," Mum said, "but put on your slicker and your wellies. It looks like rain." A few minutes later, I was set out in my duck-yellow slicker with my big green rubber gum boots on an adventure to Grandma's house. I found a stick on the way, my sword for this quest, and I was cutting through the sheep fields and heading for the little path between the fields. It was a place I liked to play sometimes, and my grandfather had told me it had once been the site of a great battle. He said old Danish kings were known to make war on each other, and the land around Copenhagen had seen a lot of bloodshed over the years. The area between the farms, but a quarter-mile of dirt road, was said to have been the site of several skirmishes, and I wonder now how many had lost their lives there. As a child, however, it was just fun to think of knights fighting each other as their steel clanged and the horses whinnied. I heard the thunder rumble, something that was not the loud sound of hooves charging forward, and thought that Mum was right. The rain would be coming soon. If I didn't want to get wet, I needed to hurry. Getting wet wasn't really something I was too worried about, but Gran liked to keep the house nice and dry, and a wet little boy was likely to be asked to leave after he'd eaten only a few cookies. I came out onto the road, racing the rain, but I wasn't alone. Perched on the wooden fence, which separated the road from the fields, were ravens. I don't mean crows or blackbirds. I mean ravens. If you've never seen them together, then you might not understand, but ravens are quite a bit larger than crows. They are more than a little scary looking too, especially to a child not yet 10. I expected they would take flight when I came onto the road, but they did not. They sat looking at me like hateful old men watching a trespasser, and it was clear that they would not leave simply because I was there. They were proud birds, and this was their place, and it was I who was the interloper. It was spooky, but I wasn't really afraid of them. I was a little scared. There were a lot of them, and I was a small boy, but I didn't think they would hurt me. These were no boogeymen, no trolls or goblins, and they were more spooky than scary. Papa put out straw men to keep these devils out of the garden. They were birds, and birds couldn't hurt me. "Boy," said a voice, and I froze in my tracks. "Boy," it said again, and I looked around to see who had spoken. Was it one of the ravens? Ravens could speak. I'd heard that somewhere, and maybe these ravens had picked up a word or two. Mum said ravens were smart after all, so it wasn't that hard to imagine that it could be them talking. I kept walking, trying not to look at them as I went. They were just birds. They didn't want anything from me. Birds didn't talk to people. They just, "Boy, stop," the same croaky voice said. That drew me up short. The bird had told me to stop, so I had. I felt a chill run up my spine as I turned to look at the group of crows. A murder. It was a murder when it was crows. And I saw one that was different. His feathers were white. They weren't gray. They were snow white. His beak and legs were black, the color his feathers ought to be, but his eyes were the most frightening part of him. They were red, like a rat's eyes, and they stared at me with far too much intelligence. We just stood there for a while, staring at each other as the thunder built overhead, and I started to wonder if I had imagined the whole thing. It was still just a bird, so it had two words. What of it? Didn't mean it was different from the rest or anything. "Thank you, boy," it said, its speech perfectly understandable, if not a little raspy. "I was not sure you would stop for a moment. I have to ask a favor of you, but in return I will grant you any wish you desire." I looked around, expecting to see someone standing nearby throwing their voice, but it was just me and the ravens. The thunder rumbled again overhead, but the rain coming on fast behind me was the least of my concerns. Now I was more worried about the talking raven with the white feathers. I started to say, not sure how to answer. "Are you talking to me?" The raven appeared to chuckle, a clicking sound that the others picked up quickly. "Well, who else would I be talking to? You and I are the only ones talking out here, are we not?" I nodded, supposing that was so.
So I am here to offer you your heart's desire in exchange for a favor of my asking. Do you agree?
I started to nod. I was very close to just nodding before learning more, but Papa had always been very clear about blindly accepting things. Papa was a man who had worked to get where he was, and he always told me to be wary of deals that seemed too good to be true. Anyone who wants you to sign on the dotted line without letting you read the contract is trying to trick you out of something, and it's often something you wouldn't want to try to live without, he would say, and I remembered his words in the nick of time. How is it that you can talk? I asked, and the bird ruffled a little at the question.
Well, ravens are smart, everyone knows this, but I am a Val Raven, and I am smarter than any of my brethren. Do you know why?
I did know why, as it happened. Grandfather had told me about the Val Ravens, just as he had told me about the trolls and the gnomes and the other magical creatures that inhabit our old world. Val Ravens are ravens that have eaten the flesh of a king, I said, and the bird seemed to smile as much as a beak could smile.
Very close, boy. Val Ravens have eaten the heart of a king. It was right here, actually, a very long time ago. Would you like to hear about it?
I nodded. Very much. My grandfather told me this place had seen many battles.
Your grandfather is wise, the white bird said. I was barely in my first year when I saw the pinions and banners waving. We were more interested in the men carrying them, however, my murder and I. In those days, when men with banners went somewhere, they were often bodies in the place where they stopped to do battle. Banners we were following that day. They did not do well, and we fell on them after the fighting was done and ate our fill. I found him then, the man with the shiny hat. I did not know he was a king, not then. I only knew that his hat had caught the light when the sun came out from behind a cloud, and it drew me to him. His armor was broken, and his blood was running free. Someone had pierced his heart with a lance, and I ate it happily. It was meat, and meat was good. But as I ate, I began to know things. I knew that the meat was a heart, and the hat was a crown, and the king was named Lenthal. His castle was far from here, in a place called Wales, and he would never go home again. Never again. I also knew something else. I knew I would never die until I gained what I needed. I would never truly live. That is why I need you, boy. You have what I need, and to get it, I am willing to make a deal with you. Whatever you desire shall be yours, but only if you agree to give me what I need.
For the second time that day, I was prepared to agree. My family was not rich, though we were better than most, and there were things I needed, just like any child. A new bike, a box kite, a real sword, a horse, a stable of horses. I could have anything I wanted. The Valraven was magic. Grandfather had said so. But as I opened my mouth, I remembered something else Grandfather had told me. The Valraven is a smart but tricksy bird. It knows it can only be human if it gains what it most desires. He had said,
puffing his pipe as he sat before the fire. "And what does it most desire, grandfather?" I asked, scooting a little closer as I waited for him to tell. I expected it to be treasure or a magic book or true love or something from the usual stories, but it was much worse than that. My grandfather leaned back and looked me in the eye as he delivered the answer, and I realized now that it had been intended to scare me. Grandfather believed in the things he talked about, trolls and redcaps and Valraven, and he wanted me to be wary of them as well. After that night, I certainly was wary, and it surprises me now that it took me so long to remember that night as I sat before the fire, listening to the tales. "A child's heart," he almost whispered, and as I stood there in the road, I heard that same whisper creep up my spine like a spider in the dead of night. "Do we have a deal?" the Valraven asked, but I was already backing away. I shouldn't have talked to it. I shouldn't have stopped. And as I began to run, I heard the Valraven quark angrily as the murder took flight. I was running as fast as I could, the raindrops beginning to fall as my feet ate up the ground. I could see the lane that would take me to my grandparents' house, but it looked miles long as the beat of wings sounded behind me. There were so many of them, a whole murder of them, and I fancied that my slicker rustled as they dove at me. The rain was falling hard now, the drops becoming a downpour, and I expected their talons to find me any minute. When the angry quark began to sound behind me, I looked back to see them flying drunkenly as the rain soaked them. Later I would find out that birds don't usually fly in the rain because it makes their feathers heavy, which makes their movements difficult and their steering and maintaining flight almost impossible. If they had come after me on a sunny day, I would have been ripped apart. Ravens are large, and in such numbers, I would have been unable to hold them off. Instead, the rain thwarted them, and I made it to my grandparents' house in one piece. Grandma was a little miffed at the mud and the water that I had tracked in, but I think she realized something was wrong when she found me curled up in a corner of her mudroom in tears. She asked me what had happened, clearly afraid that someone had tried to snatch me or some such thing, but I just kept shaking my head and whispering, "Valraven, Valraven," until she called my grandfather from the den and asked him what I was saying. Grandfather listened. He nodded, and then he took me in his arms and brought me into the den to sit by the fire. Grandmother came in a few minutes later with cookies and milk, and we sat and listened to the rain, Grandfather asking me if I'd seen one of the tricksy birds. I nodded, and he nodded in return. That was all that was ever said about it. After my cookies were eaten, he put me in his old truck and took me home. We never spoke of it again, and it was never brought up between anyone after that.
None of us believed him. How could we? It was just so odd that it couldn't be true. I swear to you that it happened. I can't prove it, but I swear to you it happened. We all just kind of shook our heads, but the look on Roger's face should have been proof enough that he was serious. He just looked so haunted, like he'd seen something that would never leave him. Roger's a habitual drunk. He manages it well for work, but he's been a drunk since I met him in college. Not a social drinker, or a fun drunk either, but a hardcore alcoholic. Like I said, he keeps it under control so he can hold a job down, but from quitting time till he passes out, Roger is drunk and in his own world.
The story he told us happened in the park last night, and the way he told it made me think that while he was telling it, he might be stone sober. Roger had been off that day, so, of course, he's headed straight down to McGrady's at 11 just as the other day drinkers were starting to sober up. He drank his lunch, met us for shots after Ryan and I got off work, and then left about 8 when the bartender told him to stop smacking the jukebox or get the hell out. Roger, very drunk at this point, had staggered out and gone to the park across the way. He intended to sit for a minute and wait for his head to stop spinning long enough to pick up a fresh bottle and start drinking at home. I was sitting on the bench near the little pond, you know, the one across from the hollow oak tree. I had nodded, knowing just what he was talking about. The hollow oak is kind of a landmark in the town. Guys from the agricultural college had tested it a few years ago and determined that it was 80% hollow on the inside. They were at a loss to say how it stayed in the ground, but it did, and people sometimes came to take pictures. The city had set up a little chain perimeter around it, and you weren't supposed to touch it or disturb it in any way. So I'm sitting there, watching the sun go down, and night begins to settle, when I see this guy come out of the tree. We had asked him if he meant someone had been, up in the tree or leaning against the base of the tree. But Roger just shook his head and repeated that the guy had been inside the tree. It's like he had floundered with his words for a minute before settling on, you remember when you were a kid and you played with Play-Doh? You had that thing that would squeeze the clay through a little hole and make like spaghetti or something? Well, it was kind of like that, except way worse. He said it had started with an arm. At first, Roger had just thought it might be a squirrel or a bird, but when the finger gripped the bark, he began to think he might be hallucinating. The arm pulled its way out of the knothole, and pretty soon, a pale shoulder was sticking out too. The shoulder stretched and turned, and when a head followed, Roger said he almost screamed. He was certain he was hallucinating then, sure that the sauce had finally cooked his brain, but he doubted even his mind could create something like this. The tree pushed the person out, head and shoulders, knees and toes, and the man had hit the ground on all fours like some kind of spider. He scuttled across the grass under the chain. When he got to the edge of the barrier, he started making gagging noises. As Roger watched, the man had thrown up a dozen small somethings and then scuttled to the other corner of the barricade to do it again. He had done this 3 more times, upchucking into each, and when he looked up from the 4th round, he had made eye contact with Roger. The man's face, he said, had been confused but not afraid. He was looking at something unfamiliar, and when he smiled, Roger felt his breath catch in his throat. The man's teeth were pointed like a bunch of sewing needles, and the look had been far bigger than Roger's pickled brain could understand. The smile looked painful, too big, like he could have swallowed me whole. Roger had run then, run all the way home. That's where we'd found him last night, passed out on the floor and mumbling in his sleep. I finished my coffee and told Roger that he better get ready if he wanted to ride to work. Roger said he wasn't going in today, though. He'd told the boss he didn't feel well, and I told him I'd meet him at McGrady's after work. He had shaken his head at me, mumbling about how he'd never go back in that bar again. I think I might be done with the sauce for a while, he said, his voice shaking like a leaf. I rolled my eyes and left for work, expecting I'd find him drunk when I got to the bar that night. When I got to the bar at 6 o'clock, though, he was nowhere to be seen. The bartender said he hadn't seen him all day, but asked me to remind him that his tab still needed settling. I asked a few of the regulars, and they said they hadn't seen him either, so I stepped out of McGrady's and found a familiar shape sitting in the park. I walked up to Roger and found him stone sober, sitting on the same park bench he had told me about in his story. "Have you been here all day?" I asked. Roger nodded as he stared at the tree. I had never seen Roger this way, and it kind of scared me. I'd seen him sober before, and I'd seen him drunk plenty of times, but this was different. He was like a different person, someone who's seen something he can't comprehend, and I felt sorry for whatever it was that was going on inside his head. "You were serious about that thing, weren't you?" I asked. Roger nodded, his eyes boring into the tree like he meant to melt it. I wanted to walk away, but I found myself sitting down beside him instead. My morbid curiosity had gotten the better of me, and if this creature was real, then I wanted to see it myself. So, we sat like watchers in a theater, waiting for the show to begin. It wasn't a short sit either. 6 became 7, 7 became 8, and 8 became 8:30 as we sat watching the sun sink lower and lower. It was high summer, and the days were long. Just before 8:30, the sun became a burning coal on the horizon, and the two of us tensed for what might or might not be about to happen. As the darkness settled over us, I sighed. Good one, Roger. Got me to waste my whole afternoon on this nonsense. Come on, I'll buy you a drink, and you can have a good laugh at me about how you... But he grabbed my arm then, pointing at the tree with a shaky hand. I looked back, and a long pink worm was beginning to make its way out of the knothole. It's just a worm, Roger. You got drunk and hallucinated something that scared you. I'm glad you're using it as an excuse to get sober, but don't ask me to buy into your delusion. Does that look like a worm to you? He asked, his voice shaking. I glanced back and saw that it indeed no longer resembled a worm. The one worm had become 5, and they were attached to a pale pink hand. The hand had unfurled from the hole like an alien flower, and as the wrist made its way out, I realized that the show had begun. The wrist emerged, and behind it came an arm and an elbow. The shoulder was next, and as the tree sprouted a man, I found myself unable to look away. He came slithering from the knothole, this boneless creature in human flesh. It was like watching dough being pushed through a press, and I wondered how it could possibly do this. When his head came free, it looked like nothing so much as a helium balloon being inflated. How? I gibbered, my mind refusing to understand what it was seeing. How can this be? If Roger knew, he never answered. The two of us sat mesmerized as we watched this fully grown man come slithering from a gnarled hole too small for a squirrel to fit into. He hung from the opening when it was down to his legs, a caterpillar ready to slide from his cocoon, and he hit the ground on his back before flipping over gracefully and scuttling on all fours towards the chain-link fence. When he opened his mouth, a spray of small somethings came spilling out onto the ground. They were black, looking like the smooth river stones you sometimes buy at a hobby store. He threw up about 20 of them before scuttling to the other corner. He repeated this operation 4 times, and as he opened his mouth for the 4th time, I saw the double row of pointed teeth in his oddly large mouth. He looked up after seeing us, and just as Roger had said, he smiled before scuttling back into his tree and pressing himself back into the hole. It was like watching a blow-up doll deflate in slow motion. First his arms, then his shoulders, then his head, then his legs. Before long, his feet were disappearing grotesquely back into the cramped little opening. By the time he was done, it was almost 9, and I felt as though my brain had been awake for days. That probably sounds weird, but when you see something like that, something that just doesn't make sense, your brain tries its best to make it fit into the picture of the world you know. Birds fly, fish swim, and this man compresses himself in and out of a tree so he can throw up. I stood up then, and Roger grabbed my arm. Don't do it. If you look, you won't be able to stop yourself. I pulled myself away from him, wanting to see what it was. I needed to know. Why did he come out to throw these things up? Were they bugs that were killing the tree? Were they some kind of sickness he had to keep purging? Why did this thing that defied logic come out of this tree just to throw up these whatever they were? I bent down, taking out my phone as I shone a light on the pile closest to us. I gasped. I couldn't help myself. They were acorns. Solid black acorns that were about 2 sizes too large to be a normal acorn. I reached down to pick one up, but my hand froze before I could touch it. I stood up, wiping my hand despite it having touched nothing, and offered to buy Roger a drink anyway. After what we had seen, I thought we both probably needed one. No thanks. I think I'm done with drinking for a while. Maybe you ought to come home too, he offered. We ended up heading home and just watching TV for the rest of the night. Roger hasn't had a drop of alcohol in a month, and I still find myself dreaming about that strange creature once or twice a week. It'll fade in time, but I want to get it down here so other people know. Given what happened yesterday, it's information that people might need. You see, The news reported that the Hollow Oak had gone. No one had seen it go, but the patrons of McCrady's had speculated that it must have been between midnight and 5 a.m. when the bar closed. Many of them had seen the old tree when they came inside, but reported that it was gone when they left at 5 a.m. after last call. But never fear, local botanists have reported that a small sapling has already sprouted in the spot its predecessor occupied. There's no evidence to suggest it might also be a hollow oak, but this reporter certainly hopes so, the man on the TV had said. I'd like to say this is where it ends, but unfortunately, there's a little more. You see, I couldn't get those strange acorns out of my head. I kept thinking about them, wondering about them. So the night before the hollow oak left, I went and watched the man as he went about his strange and disgusting ritual. Once he had gone back inside his tree, I went to the pile and took one. I put it in my jacket pocket, and now it's sitting on my desk. It seems to draw my eye, the little acorn almost appearing to beat like an infected heart. And my mind tells me to plant it in the ground. Roger told me that if I touched it, I wouldn't be able to help myself. And I guess he was right. I don't know how much longer I can stop myself from planting this thing, but I fear what might come tumbling out one night if it grows. So if the hollow oak should happen to land in your town, don't touch its strange occupant's acorns if he should come out to deposit them. I wouldn't interrupt his strange ritual either, not if I were you. The occupant seems harmless, but those teeth must be for eating something.
I hadn't wanted to go to Applebee's, but my friends insisted. I'm not opposed to going out for a meal, but I hate going to Applebee's in our town. It's a gathering place for every half-drunk Chad and happy-hour drunk who doesn't have enough money to drink at the yacht club, but has too much class to go to the Tilted Stool. We aren't big drinkers. I mean, we like to tie on a few sometimes, but these guys get downright sloppy. We get a booth as far from the bar as we can, and it's still so damn noisy in there. By the end of the night, we're all yelling at each other just to be heard over the jukebox or the drunks. I spend the rest of the night with my eardrums pounding and my head ready to crack open. At least that's how it's always been until tonight. So, we're in the back booth, like always, when I see the guy. Mark was talking about some girl he was seeing from work, Frank laughing like a donkey. His latest drink bounced around, threatening to spill as he pounded the table, and I looked up from my cowboy burger, just in time to see this guy hunkered over his food at the end of the row. He was bent over his plate, top of his bald head gleaming, and the light overhead lit him like a wax sculpture. I'm not usually one for people watching, but this guy kinda stood out. He reminded me of a story from Temple, back when I still went with my parents. They told us a story about a guy who'd built a creature to get revenge, a golem, and that was my first thought when I saw this guy. That sounds a little harsh, but I only mean he appeared not like a man, more like the approximation of a man. He had a white button-up, a red tie hanging loose around his neck, and even from here I could see the sweat starting to pool under his arms. Despite the noise, I could hear him almost perfectly, too. At first, I thought he was eating his meal real loudly, bent over at the waist like a dog. But the longer I watched, the more I thought he might be crying. His shoulders were hitching in slow up and down jerks, and he appeared to be sobbing into his plate. I felt a little voyeuristic as I watched him. Poor guy was probably living what was the worst day of his life. He'd probably been stood up for a date or lost his mom, and here I was just watching. When Mark nearly leaned into my ear, I jumped a little when he spoke. "What you looking at, Pally?" He followed my line of sight and found the poor guy before I could. Whew! That's a guy who's got a date with a rope later. Frank turned to look, but winced as Mark kicked him. "Don't look! Ain't you got no sense?" Poor fella. Kinda looks like this guy that came into the gas station the other night. He comes in high as a kite, and when I wouldn't sell him beer, he just starts crying. And Mark went on, but I wasn't really paying any attention anymore. I felt a little bad for continuing to watch him, but I just couldn't turn away. Something about him was mesmerizing. It was like driving past a car crash and being unable to stop staring at the bodies on the pavement. You know it's wrong to stare, but you just can't stop. Frank was braying laughter again, and I could see our waitress contemplating whether to cut him off or not as she came to get our plates. Mark told her he was fine, and Frank ordered another beer. And after several tense seconds and an elbow from Mark, I snapped back to myself and said I was okay too. "Geez, buddy," Mark said as the waitress shuffled off. "You gonna go over and propose?" "What are you talking about?" I asked, biting into my burger and realizing it was about lukewarm. Had I really been staring at that poor guy as my burger turned to ice? "You've been staring at him for like 10 minutes. Thought you were gonna order him a drink for a minute." We all laughed, mine being a little forced, and then Mark stood up and waved to a pair coming through the door. Jim and his wife Celine waved at us in turn, and Frank moved to our side of the table so the two lovebirds could sit together. They had been inseparable since college, and I don't think I'd ever seen one without the other more than a handful of times. They excused their lateness. Their sitter had been late, and Jim started in on a story about how she had gotten lost and turned down the wrong road, when I turned my attention back to the poor guy 2 booths down. He was still bent over his burger, still quietly sobbing, but the way his shoulders moved had started to seem wrong. I was no expert on sobbing, but this guy's herky-jerky movements were starting to look like something else. A rational part of me chastised myself for continuing to stare at this poor guy, but I was like a moth to flame now. He was my car wreck, and I was starting to notice signs of foul play. When he snorted loudly, I heard the laughter for the first time. It made me shiver a little as I heard it thrum into me like a badly played piano note. The guy wasn't crying. He was laughing. The more I looked, the more I could see bits of meat and lettuce sprayed over the tabletop. The longer I looked, the more I wondered how I'd misunderstood his laughter for crying. I was now drawn deeper into this web of strangeness. No escape in sight. Crying was one thing. I could understand crying, but who sits in a booth by themselves and laughs? Was he nuts? Some kind of mental case who was off his meds? Watching him from behind Selena's shoulder, I wondered if he might be dangerous. Maybe we should leave. Maybe I should suggest that we change venues, but all thought of escaping fled from me as he lifted his head from that plate. The scream that welled up inside me was cut off by my constricted throat and likely sounded like nothing so much as a sigh. The man's face looked like a fantastic bit of prosthesis. It was like a piece of Halloween decoration that's just a little too realistic. The kind you worry might contain a person who wants to bite. His face looked like the front of a thumb, calloused and rippled with wrinkles or ridges. His eyes were like colorless slits, something slashed into his face with a knife. His nose appeared to be drawn on, like a cartoon character's. He was unreal, something that shouldn't exist in polite society outside of a circus tent. His mouth, though, his mouth was the worst. His mouth was full of long, needle-like teeth, reminding me of an anglerfish as it protruded from his thin lips. Those teeth looked like they would never close comfortably. From here, it looked like they would constantly poke at your lips and gums, and you would be in agony most of the time. There were pieces of meat on those teeth, red raw chunks that had been speared by them, and that's when I looked down at the plate. It was covered in the grisly remains of what looked like chunks of raw hamburger meat. I doubted like hell that the staff had just handed this guy raw beef, but the alternative seemed even wilder. The alternative was that this man had brought his own raw meat from home so he could just consume it here in public. As the horror ran through me like ice water, I looked up to see those colorless slits observing me. The two of us just stared at each other for a count of 5. Then he pulled those thin lips and monstrous teeth into a smile, and I could see red pooling at the edges of his flesh. I glanced over at Mark and Frank, both now sitting on my side of the booth, but neither of them had noticed him. The 4 of them were involved in a conversation like there wasn't a monster sitting 12 feet from us. It seemed impossible that anyone could be having a normal conversation so close to that creature. Its very presence should have triggered some ancient primal node deep in our brains and forced us to either destroy it or flee from it. The 4 of them were talking about jobs and school and Jim and Celine's daughter, while this thing got to exist in humanity with the rest of us. It was too much to handle. Suddenly I wanted out. I wanted to be anywhere but there. I tried to tap on Mark to get him to move or to look up or just acknowledge that I was losing my mind within easy reach of him. But my body wouldn't respond. I managed to flick my fingers at his arm, bumping him a little, but he only rubbed a hand over it as if a bug had landed on him. Celine was talking about the new Pokemon game, and Mark and Frank were just nerdy enough and broke enough to be enraptured by her descriptions. I was stuck in a state of eye contact with that thing, and the longer I looked, the more it seemed to drink me in with those strange eyes. Then, without warning, it began to sink down in its seat, becoming lost beneath its table. I panicked. Suddenly not being able to see it was worse than having it on display. Could it sink beneath our table? How far could it go? How close could it get? I was suddenly imagining the damage those teeth could do to a foot, even a foot within a shoe, and I pulled mine up a little higher as Selena's words washed over me. He didn't resurface for quite some time, and you would have said that such a thing would not have gone unnoticed. Then he slid back up from under the table on the opposite side of the booth. He was grinning from ghastly ear to ear, and he looked like a little kid who's trying to play with the table behind them. There was still a table between us and him, but I was no longer sure how much protection that provided us. I didn't know his mental state, and whether he meant to do us harm or not, but when he dipped back down again, I started shaking. "What's wrong with you?" Mark asked suddenly, turning to look at me as I shuddered beside him. I pointed to the empty plate where the man had been sitting, and Mark looked over before scoffing loudly. "Oh no, your boyfriend left. Don't worry, I'm sure most of those guys at the bar will take you home if you ask them nicely enough." "What's going on?" Jim asked, noticing my discomfort and looking alarmed. "He's obsessed with the guy that's sitting a couple of tables back. Couldn't take his eyes off of him, I swear. Thought he was gonna try to console the guy for a minute. Dude was just sitting there crying, and this freak's over here looking at..." The bald, sweaty head began to surface behind Selena, and when I shouted for her to look out, the whole restaurant went dead silent. Jim and Selena turned to look, but there was nothing behind them. I'd had enough, though. I pushed Mark and Frank out of the way, freeing myself from the booth as I went to go check under the table behind us. He'd be crouching down there, grinning like the little goblin that he was. But as I got down on my knees and looked beneath, I was greeted by nothing but an empty space. The waitress asked me what I was looking for as I moved to look under his table as well, but by then I was already intent on leaving. I got in my car, threw the keys in the ignition, and sped off as fast as I could. Sitting at home now, I I can't get that image out of my head. My phone's been blowing up, and I know my friends are worried. I can't make sense of it. What was that thing? Why did it take such an interest in me? Is it dangerous? Did it follow me home? Every time I close my eyes, I see those repulsive needle-like teeth and the no-color slits looking back at me. Every time I close my eyes, I wonder if I'll ever be able to see anything. Every time I close my eyes, I wonder if I'll ever be able to see anything but that creature again.
Hey, folks, and welcome to the show. It's your dude, the unconquerable Wafflesaurus Gamer. Today, I've got a real treat for you. As far as jobs go, flying free to Japan to edit footage was pretty good. I'd been the other half of my best friend's YouTube channel for nearly 2 years now, his dedicated editor and sometimes cameraman when the need arose. Travis, or Wafflesaurus Gamer, as he was known on YouTube, had a fairly popular Let's Play channel, in which he played everything from the shiniest new games, to the oldest retro titles, to the most ghastly train wrecks the internet has to offer. He had a modest fan base that seemed to like his Logan Paul-esque style, and the guests he had from time to time were entertaining enough to hold the attention of an 8 to 25-year-old demographic. 2 weeks ago, though, someone had sent him a weird one. The guy claimed to be from the outskirts of Japan, said he and his brother had gone to a game parlor with a reputation for obscure titles. They had gone to play a game that had been stirring up rumors in their little town, a game called Your Corner of Hell. The writer said very little was known about the game, but some kids in the village were supposed to have gone crazy or killed themselves because of the things they had seen in the game. The two had, of course, wanted to play this mysterious game. The owner had heard their request, money had changed hands, and the guy and his brother had been invited to the back of the arcade to play the game. The older brother had gone first. The room had a one-occupant rule, and the younger brother waited for a while his brother played for what seemed like hours. We went into the arcade at 10:30, just as they opened, but my brother didn't come out of that room until well past dark. The younger brother had sat for around an hour before boredom brought him back into the arcade. I spent several hours playing the machines, down to the lint in my pockets, and still he hadn't come out. As the sun went down, he heard a commotion near the front. The owner was carrying someone over his shoulder and shouting at the younger brother to get lost. The owner shoved him from behind, his meaty hand moving him easily. When the younger brother was on the sidewalk, the owner had tossed the thing that he'd been carrying onto the pavement and shuttered his shop up for the night. The thing he had been carrying turned out to be the boy's older brother. He was unconscious. The doctors say he's in some kind of coma and he may never recover. The owner denied that he'd ever even seen us, of course, and he has some kind of connections that keep the police from investigating him too closely. I know you play weird games, and I hate to bring you into something like this, but could you please go and try to find this game? The man at the parlor will let you in the back if you tell him Lilith sent you. Please, if you can find out what my brother saw, maybe they can help him. And now, here we were, standing outside the shabby arcade. We had flown into Hiroshima and taken a train out to the town of Tomanoru so we could meet the younger brother, a 15-year-old named Hisu. He recounted the tale to us as we sat in his mother's kitchen and drank some strong tea. The boy's hands had trembled as he spoke, and he seemed on the verge of tears as he retold his story. My parents are at the hospital with Ichi, praying that he will recover. He was supposed to go to university this year, but now it's unlikely that he will ever recover. The kid's English was pretty good, but when Travis asked if he wanted to come with us, I didn't need words to read the terror on his face. I haven't been back since the incident. I won't go near it again. A lot of kids in the village won't go there anymore either, not after what happened to Ichi. He wished us luck and said that he would pray for our return. Standing outside the grungy arcade, I didn't see what all the fuss was about. The facade was filthy, ivy hanging from the canopy, and bars installed over the dingy windows. The dust on the windows looked like you could have written in it, and the spiderwebs in the corners looked old enough to have seen the Reagan administration. The door was a black, gaping mouth with a roll-down shutter that would lock at night. As we stood, I could hear the beeps and plinks from inside, the familiar sounds of Pac-Man and Street Fighter, and the sounds were comforting somehow. Even in this foreign land, the sounds of familiar games could bring me comfort. "So, got everything hooked up?" I asked, going over his setup one more time. His glasses were set up with a pair of digital recorders that were damn near undetectable. As he recorded, the camera feed would be continuously uploading to the cloud. I could pick through the footage later and edit it into something usable for the channel. Since I couldn't come with him, he would have to record his events as he saw them. I was mostly on location to call the police if anything weird happened. A few local kids may not pique the police's interest, but an American tourist with 500,000 sub count might make them a little more willing to investigate this place. It made me feel like a real reporter, working in the field to expose the truth. How quickly we forget that those people too can die. "It's as ready as it'll ever be. Let's see if there's anything to see," Travis said, a big grin spread across his face. We walked into the building that was awash with blinking lights and a cacophony of sounds. Children of all ages were hunkered over the blinking machines. Others were running around and laughing as they tried to find their favorite games. I could hear the wooden chunk of a skee-ball machine, the metallic clink of an air hockey table as the puck zipped around the smooth surface, the hollow boom of a shooting game, and the pop tunes of Dance Dance Revolution. The owner had a modest collection of classic arcade cabinets as well, and even at a glance, I could tell that this was a place that made money. Standing behind the counter, looming like a monster amidst the brightly colored prizes and flashing signs, was a giant, grinning man. He was easily 7 feet tall, and nearly as wide. He had an oily mustache that sat under a bulbous, greasy nose, and his eyes were like a mean-spirited pig that loves to snap at curious children. He reminded me of a picture book I had owned as a child, Puss in Boots, and how the ogre had made me feel scared. The warty ogre had sat on his cushion in his beautiful clothes and looked down at the cat as it wove its lies. Even as a child, I had thought the look made him look menacing. It was a look that said plainly the cat was in danger of being devoured. The man spoke to Travis in what I assumed was Japanese, a language I was not familiar with, and Travis spoke back to him with relative ease. The man smiled, showing several blackened teeth, and spoke to Travis in English, though this English sounded more like European than actual American English. "Ah, an American. So word of my special game has spread that far, eh?" "Infamy more like it," Travis said. The man's smile looked a little off after that. "You'll need to sign a waiver if you'd like to play. After the last incident, I really must protect myself from further accusations." Travis scanned the document, looking for traps, and I asked the owner about the game. "What is it that seems to be making your customers react so badly?" "Well, there are the usual rumors that surround the game. The creator died, his spirit haunts the game is actually a portal to hell. Many strange rumors surround my little shop, but I can assure you that the game is just a regular game, nothing special that need elicit such reactions." Travis had finished signing the paperwork and was ready to see this game. "Only one of you at a time, boys. You'll have to wait out here," he said, pointing a dirty finger at me as Travis stepped behind the counter. The last time I saw Travis, he flashed me a peace sign and smiled with a big grin. "See you on the other side," he intoned. Then he disappeared into the shadowy back room as I remained in the world of flashing lights and familiar sounds. I turned away from the counter and found myself drawn by the brightly colored lights and the machine's electronic blare. I spent some time playing familiar games: Tekken, Marvel vs. Capcom, Time Crisis 2, House of the Dead. I took a spin at Initial D, a very intuitive racing game, and had my ass handed to me by a local kid at Street Fighter 2. These same kids then talked me into playing Dance Dance Revolution with them, and I had a blast as I tripped along to several of the fast and bubbly songs they picked. I lost track of time for a while, enjoying myself, enjoying the company of kids half my age who didn't speak a word of my language. When a shadow fell across us, though, their smiling faces curdled and they scattered like birds. I looked up from some unpronounceable game that hadn't made it to America and found the owner standing over me, 2 large men flanking him. He looked angry, his face wooden yet still smiling, and he told me to get my things and leave. I was shocked. Was he kicking me out? Had I violated some unknown rule? I had easily spent $50 in this place, and the idea that he was here to pull me out made no sense. I'm here with my friend, the one in the back. I'll leave when he finishes his... He's gone. He broke a costly machine and left out the back. Now I want you gone too, before I call the authorities. Wait, I stammered. Which way did he go? I'm a stranger here. I don't know any... But it seemed they weren't here to negotiate with me. The two large men had me under the arms in a heartbeat, and before I knew it, I was half drugged, half carried from the shop. They deposited me onto the sidewalk with a distinct lack of grace, and the owner stood in the doorway as I got up and stood with confusion. You and your friend are banned. Leave the premises before I call the authorities, he said, evenly, before slamming the shutter down in my face. That's how I came to be outside the dingy shop without Travis, half a world from home with no clue how to get back. I had no choice but to walk to the Hisawa residence. He was the only person I knew in Tamanoru, and without knowing how to speak the language, I was practically helpless. Hisawa spoke English, Hisawa knew the area, and Hisawa knew the people that lived in the village. Hopefully one of them could help me find Travis, and I could get him through whatever was going on so we could get home. Also, Hisawa had a computer, which I would need to find Travis. Travis had gone to the back wearing the glasses. The camera on those glasses had been uploading to the cloud for the past 5 hours. If I could link up with the cloud, I could watch the video he had uploaded and get some ideas of where he was going. That would allow me to find him and get us both back home. If only it had been that easy. Hisawa, it turned out, wasn't home. His house was locked up, and the lights inside were dark. He had probably gone to see his brother in the hospital, and as dusk began to set, I made my way back into town. I was looking for somewhere, anywhere with Wi-Fi, to access the videos on my phone. It wouldn't be as stable as accessing them from a dedicated connection, but if it helped me find Travis, I didn't care how I went about it. It was getting dark, and I started to worry that I wouldn't find him until morning. When the familiar arches of a McDonald's came into view, I breathed a sigh of relief. They had Wi-Fi, and after purchasing some food, I was pretty hungry after not eating all day, I plopped down in a booth near the back wall and made my way into the file program. The file was there, but the program had stopped updating about 20 minutes ago. That was weird, but if he had wandered off the signal range, it could be that the program couldn't get a connection anymore. I clicked on the file and got 6 hours worth of video. I gasped. Surely I hadn't been in the arcade that long. It didn't feel like I had been in there any time, but my stomach was empty, and I had been known to lose track of time when I was playing games. I ate as the file finished downloading. I had finished my food when a message popped up that the files were ready to view. The video began as we walked on the sidewalk. I heard myself asked if the equipment was working okay. We walked inside, spoke with the owner, and I could hear myself asking questions as Travis looked over the paperwork. He signed, followed the guy into the back, and turned suddenly to treat me to a last look at my worried face. "See you on the other side," he intoned, before turning back and walking into the dim back room. He walked past a line of overstuffed shelves to a hallway with several closed doors. Some of the doors had shadow lights beneath them, shadowy forms doing God knew what, but the man led him to a particular door and opened it with a key. Inside was a sit-down cabinet similar to the old joystick arcade games. The cabinet filled the room, and there was barely enough room to enter as Travis stepped inside. "When you're done, lock the door as you leave," the man said, his almost European tone still hanging over his voice, not like the angry one I had gotten as he threw me on the sidewalk. Then he closed the door, and Travis was alone with the softly glowing screen. The screen was large, 50 inches at least, and the words "Your Corner of Hell" pulsated across it. Travis looked for a coin slot and found none. He sat down and grasped a joystick, a single piece of plastic with no buttons or triggers. He looked around for a start button. Travis spoke to the audience, telling them that this was the game that had garnered all the hype, and he was going to see what all the fuss was about. He had just said something about not finding a start button when the screen emitted an odd static noise and bathed the room in a harsh white light. Travis snapped his eyes forward, and I had to shield my own eyes against the bright intrusion. Then the screen darkened, and Travis was staring at a bleak landscape of reds and blacks. He moved the joystick, the screen panning around, and it became apparent that he was in a cave. Travis praised the graphics, walking up to the wall and inspecting the textures. I had to admit, it was very impressive. The renderings were far beyond anything the cabinet or the screen should have been capable of. For a second, I could swear the pictures on the console were real-time. The cave walls were made of dark stone with veins of red that wound through them in arteries. The walls pulsated and moved oddly, and when he turned, there was a dim light coming from the end of the tunnel behind him. Shapes moved in that light, strangely proportioned shapes, and Travis seemed hesitant to go in that direction. After a few seconds of half-heartedly looking around, though, he discovered that this was the only route and moved his character down the tunnel. Kind of basic for a game with such well-defined graphics, but whatever, Travis grumbled as he moved up the pulsating tunnel, viewing the weird rocks around him. I heard him gasp when the tunnel roof gave way to the sky, and my own breath stuck in my throat at the sight. The sky was a deep red, the red of heart's blood, and as he took it all in, I could see bodies falling from it ceaselessly. They fell close, they fell far away, and the ones that fell close to the cave splattered on the ground with sickening realism. Travis jumped back, startled as the realistic gore splattered across the ground, and I heard him use a word that would have definitely got us demonetized if I wasn't going to edit it out later. I reached for my earbuds as a family lumbered past on their way to the bathroom, the squelching making my stomach flip over a little as it erupted again and again. I didn't want anyone to hear these sounds. Hell, I didn't want to listen to these sounds when it came right down to it. As I slipped my earbuds in, I heard Travis mumbling about the level of gore as a body landed a few feet from him and burst like an overripe fruit. He seemed more intrigued than angry, though. Then, as Travis watched the body, it got up. Its limbs popped grotesquely back into place, and the naked humanoid, bald and sexless, got up and stumbled away from the site of its landing. It ignored Travis, stumbling across the dark sand that covered the ground. I could hear Travis breathing hard as he watched, and after some hesitation, he followed it. It stumbled across the sand, jumping as the hot sand burned its feet, and as it traveled away from the cave, Travis could see it joining groups of other battered bodies. They didn't speak. They grouped out of pure instinct and shuffled along as the black sand gave way to sluggish rivers of living fire. The group seemed to shy away from the fire, and I really couldn't blame them. Something seemed to be moving within the flames, and the group of bodies seemed to know that it was something that wanted to hurt them. Travis followed them, but never joined their group. He seemed to understand that these skittish creatures, humans or not, would be a target for whatever lived here, and their group would attract a lot of attention. As if to prove that point, one of them strayed a little too close to the fire and was ensnared by an arm of living flame that dragged it into the fiery river. The group looked after him, marking his departure, but they neither mourned him or slowed. They kept moving, and I could see other groups moving similarly as Travis used the joystick to look around. "What in the hell is going on with this game?" Travis asked as he followed the group at a safe distance. Am I supposed to follow them? Am I supposed to strike out on my own? I don't get the point here. He decided to follow them, despite their lack of direction, and as they neared a field of sharp black grass, I saw a creature jump out to challenge them. He was average height, his skin a deep maroon, and somehow he reminded me of the shopkeeper at the arcade. He was as wide as he was tall, and he looked at the group with a broad smile on his face. It was a distinctly gobble you up sort of smile. It spoke to them in a strange language, completely ignoring Travis as he moved in for a closer look, and some of the creatures stepped forward hesitantly to stand near him. The rest stood their ground, unsure of the stranger or whatever he was offering. It didn't matter. The nets came flying from the grass then, and the creatures yelled in a very human way as they were captured. Some tried to flee, others were resigned to their fate, but none of them tried to fight back. They were sheep, and soon they would be rounded up and taken to wherever it was they were bound. They made piteous noises as the nets fell over them, which seemed to push Travis to action. Travis rushed at the creatures, yelling at them to get the hell away, but since he possessed no weapons, he attempted to run his body into them and stop them from taking the struggling humanoids. He bumped the creatures, foundering against them, and the creatures took no more notice of him than an ant. They had the group rounded up in no time, and when they walked into the grass with their prize, Travis followed them into that sea of blackness. Maybe I'm supposed to follow them, he said, his voice a little frantic. Maybe that's my goal? He moved into the grass like a blind man, losing the creatures almost at once. When he came out, he was alone in a dark world of black sand and endless miles. He traveled into the emptiness, unsure of where he was going. He moved aimlessly, the hellscape never changing, and the falling bodies never ceasing. Travis didn't follow them anymore, though. He seemed to think it was pointless, and as he moved deeper in, I could hear his breathing becoming frantic and unsure. The game was presenting him nothing but a vast world to explore, but he seemed unable to interact with it or alter it. There were no trees to punch, no shelters to make, no goals to accomplish, and the only constant seemed to be the moans of the falling bodies or the distant screams of the unseen. The screams would erupt distantly, sending Travis turning frantically in that direction, before returning to his chosen path. He had seen no one but the creatures and the humanoids they hunted, and he was becoming a little paranoid of the big open landscape. Travis began his journey into emptiness with some commentary on the landscape, the graphics, and the game's strangeness. The farther he went into the wasteland, the more addled he seemed to become. He talked less to the audience and more to himself. At first it was just idle talk, wondering if he was going the right way or not, but slowly his speech began to descend into mumbling. The screams were starting to get to him, and I was worried that he might be losing it as his camera panned around for what felt like the 1,000th time. I fast-forwarded a little bit. His trip through the wasteland made up almost 4 hours of the total video. When he had stopped in the desert, staring at a fixed point for several minutes, I started the video and returned to his heavy, labored breathing as he stared into the distance. He sounded ragged, as though he had been slogging for hours for real, and he just stared into the distance for no reason, intent on something. Suddenly he ran towards whatever he was seeing. The camera footage was secondhand, and I leaned in as the McDonald's crowd bustled around me, trying to see what he was seeing. Whatever it was had excited him. Whatever it was had piqued his curiosity. He ran like a man possessed, stumbling in the game as he made his way over the shifting sands towards whatever lay beyond. When the first tree of the grove came into view, I thought I knew what he had seen. When I saw what was hanging from the tree, I wondered why he was in such a hurry to get to them. The grove of dark and twisted trees came looming up from the spinning air. They weren't tall, maybe 8 feet, but each of them bore a length of rope that swung from its branches. At the end of each rope was a sexless humanoid. As Travis got close, I could see the purple bruises around their necks and the boneless way they hung from the dead trees. The grove was nothing but these grotesque wind chimes, and Travis seemed less eager as he walked into it. When the first one started screaming, I cried out right along with Travis. It came as a sudden eruption in my right ear, and my sudden yelp made a couple across from me frown and look at me oddly. I apologized, turning back to the video to see Travis studying the poor creature as it twisted on the noose. It grabbed at him, speaking in a strange language that might have been English once. It held its arms out to him, pleading for relief, or for release, or something, and Travis backed away before bolting. The forest came alive then, the tortured screams and shaking trees erupting into a cacophony and fury, and Travis began to run frantically amidst the swinging horrors. He fell suddenly, tripping over a root, and when he looked up, I heard him sob audibly as his eyes fell on a single, withered humanoid. It might have once been female, but as it was, its chest was flat, its crotch smooth, and its head hairless and lumpy. As it lifted its searching, begging face to him, I could see a single half-moon scar on its cheek. She screamed and wailed just as the others had, but there was a deep longing for release in her eyes. She begged him with her eyes, cried at him with her wailing mouth, and Travis could do nothing but stare at her as she wailed into the void. "Mom?" he breathed, his voice shaky. Travis had lost his mom last year to cancer. I had known her all my life. She had made Travis and I snacks after school, drove us places in our teens, and Travis had always been so close with her that she became like a second mother to me. How many times had I seen that scar on her cheek and wondered how she'd gotten it? Her face was still as sunken as it had been in the hospital as she lay dying, and as that screaming face stared back at Travis, I saw him snap like an over-tightened guitar string. His fists came up and he slammed them into the screen. The cabinet shook, the image shivering, But Travis was far from satisfied. He slammed his fists, he kicked his booted feet, and he screamed like a wild man as the cabinet jerked and bent under his assault. How had I not heard him? How had I been feet away, having the time of my life, while my best friend had gone through the worst trauma of his? How had I not heard him screaming? How had I not heard his fury? As the cabinet sparked and broke, I could hear him screaming the same thing again and again, and it broke my heart to hear the pain in it. Mom! 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 The door swung open, and the arcade owner screamed at him, wanting to know what he was doing. Travis rushed the man, his smile now an angry gnash of teeth, and shoved him out of the way as he made a break for the back room. He turned to look at the store owner, and for just a moment, I could see the faces of those creatures that had captured the humanoids. His gnash of teeth looked like the beast's frozen grin, and I could almost hear Travis coming to the same conclusion. He bolted for the back door, and I saw him run out into the dingy alley. He looked around frantically, people on the street staring in mistrust, before taking a left turn and heading in the opposite direction we had come. He ran up the streets of Tamanaru, a stranger in a strange land, and the people on the street gave him a wide berth. He was frantic, moving like a wild animal, and when he stopped suddenly, I leaned in close to see what he was looking at. He stared, seeming to stare at his reflection in the window across the street, and the people diverted around him as he just sat there, staring. I could see his small reflection in the glass, and he looked haggard, crazed even, but his face was filled with that unhinged understanding that you sometimes see in the mentally ill. "Mom," he whispered, and without warning, he rushed across the street with the blare of car horns following him. He ran up the street, never slowing, and when he came to a familiar train station, I wondered what he meant to do. He kept calling for his mother, chasing her ghost or something else that only he could see, as people moved out of his way like he might be contagious. He ran through the platform, the rustic wooden benches looking spooky in the near dark, and the people in the loading area cried out as he jumped down onto the track. I wanted to turn away, fearing what would happen next, but I owed it to him to see his end. The train came rolling up, blowing its whistle. He ran towards it, shouting her name. "Mom! Mom!" The train whistle blared, and the people on the platform screamed, "Mom! Mom!" The train lights rolled in close, a blinding corona of light in the eyes of the camera. "Mom!" Everything went white, and then suddenly dark as the video ended. I sat back, stunned, unsure of what I had seen or what I should do. My best friend was dead, a victim of this game that I still don't understand. I watched it secondhand, so maybe it doesn't have the same effect on me, but that's little comfort in the face of my friend's violent departure from life. I have nothing now. I haven't just lost my friend, I've lost my job and my means of returning home. Travis had our tickets in his bag. He had our hotel keys in his pocket. And I'm sitting on the sidewalk of the closed McDonald's now, unsure how to proceed. I don't know what Travis saw in his last minutes of life, but I pray it wasn't his shrieking mother that hung from the skeletal tree of that damned game. All I can do is tell my story and hope that some of you will have answers. All I can do is warn you not to play this game, as enticing as it may seem. Travis would want his death to mean something. He would want his sacrifice to be more than just another Let's Play or a creepypasta. I pray that if the land in that game is real, Travis didn't become one of those falling things that came from the sky. If there is a God, I pray that he took him somewhere better.